we have to discuss about the foreign trade part 3, in which we are going to discuss about the trade policies of India almost since independence. Mostly the trade policies of India can be classified into 3 different categories based on the time. For example, between 1950 and 1960. We can say even up to 1965 also. Then again between 1960-65 to until 1970s, and then after 1980s. So this was a classification which categorized basing on the time, during which there are certain characteristic principles of the Indian trade policies. For example, during this 1950 and 1960-65, the trade policy of India was mostly based on self-reliance and self-sufficiency. Self-reliance and self-sufficiency. Next, during this 1960s and 70s, export-led growth international competitiveness export-led growth, international competitiveness and technology. These played some important role. Next, coming to 1980s, the effects of globalization and how to benefit out of globalization and achieve efficiency, that mattered important in the policies of 1980s. What are they? Globalization, and improving efficiency. Globalization and improving efficiency. So 1950 to 65, self-reliance and self-sufficiency became very important in the trade policies of India. Next, in 1960s and 70s, export-led growth and international competitiveness became more important in the trade policies of India. Next, after 1980s, it was globalization and improving the efficiency of Indian goods became important in the trade policies. So this gives an outer structure of the Indian trade policies since independence. Now let us go into deep discussion of the trade policies by considering imports as well as exports. Already in the past classes, we have discussed about how were the imports and exports of India were affected by global circumstances. Now let us discuss how the policies and principles of India itself affected the import and exports of India. In the past, we have discussed how the global effects and the scenarios in the international markets and the development of India affected the exports and imports. Now let us see how the principles as well as policies, trade policies of India itself affected the exports and imports. For this, let us consider imports and exports. in imports, import restrictions and then import substitution played prominent role in the beginning of the India's trade policies. What are they? Import restrictions and import substitution. Both of these played a very prominent role in the import policy of India in the beginning. Whereas considering exports, exports controlling regimes were very prominent. Exports controlling regimes were very prominent in the trade policies of India. If you observe clearly, with import restrictions, neither we are encouraging imports, and with exports controlling regimes, nor we are encouraging exports. Means neither we are showing interest towards imports nor towards exports. Why? What might have happened for such a decision? See, in the past we have been curbed for nearly 200 years. India has been curbed nearly for 200 years under aliens rule. And the beginning of aliens rule was just because they came here for trading, and later using political power they totally curbed the India. So with a fear that if we extend hands for foreign trading, again something adverse may happen. So with that fear, they are not trying to extend their hands in trade with other countries for imports and for exports. But later on, there are some changes. Why? See, after the Second World War, during the time we are having the independence, that is 1949, even though there are some import restrictions, since it is the beginning of our country, we need food grains and we need some capital goods for the development of industries. So, even though the import restrictions are imposed, some legibility was given for the import of food grains as well as for the import of capital goods. So, the import restrictions which were imposed on a large scale were now brought down. We can say food grains as well as capital equipment import has in one way facilitated the flow of imports into India, and the exports controlling regimes still continued. Even though some relaxation was given in import restrictions, the export controlling regimes were again continued. How the export controlling regimes were continued? By imposing more and more prohibitory tariffs on exports. Prohibitory tariffs on exports in the sense, for example, there are some goods to be exported and some manufacturers are showing some interest to export, but the government doesn't want to encourage them for exporting such goods. Then the government will impose huge taxes when they are trying to export them. If one wants to export a good A, then he has to pay a huge tax of some $450 for exporting that good. Will he try to do so? No. To come out of such prohibitory tariffs, they don't export, and such prohibitory tariffs were imposed on Indian exporters. So, exports controlling regimes were continued. Then, during the 1955 and 56, that is, it is the period of second plan, the beginning of the second 5-year plan under the guidance of Mahalanobis, which mainly concentrated on industrial development of India. forced the government of India to open the gates for the import of capital goods, intermediary goods, and those important inputs which are very necessary in production. So we can say 1956-57 as the first relaxation on imports. 1956 and 57 as the first relaxation on imports. Anyway, after the second 5-year plan, that is during 1960s, the import restrictions again continued because of the two wars for India with China as well as Pakistan, and with adverse economic situations due to the war, the import restrictions were again imposed nearly for 2 decades. We can say up to 1977 there is no question of any import liberalization in India. No question of any import liberalization in India due to war and economic crisis, because when we are allowing the imports, we have to pay the amount in foreign currency. For that we have to maintain huge amount of foreign exchange reserves. But in such economic crisis situations during the war period, and also during 1965 and 66, a very severe drought in India, which eventually forced the government of India to announce a planned holiday for 3 years, 1966, 67, 67, 68 and 68, 69. In such worse conditions, India was nowhere ready to relax the import restrictions. So it is tough to maintain foreign exchange reserves. So we nearly for 2 decades up to 1977 continued with import restrictions. Then what about this import substitution? Actually, first let us know what is the meaning of import substitution. See, an import substitution is a process by which the continuous import of some products which are called as A will be replaced by the import of a new product called B. So you are understanding me? The continuous import of a product A will be replaced by the import of a new product called B. So this is called as import substitution. That means substituting the import of a product A by means of the encouragement of import of a product called B. So that is what is called import substitution. Okay, till now we are continuously importing a product called A. Now suddenly we stopped the import of the product A and now we are replacing it with the import of product B. Then what about A? It is a continuous import. Now we are replacing that A with B. Fine. What about A? See, import substitution will be implemented in cases where that product A will be produced domestically, or now there is no necessity of the product A in the country, or the people want to replace that product A with a better quality product, maybe B. Only in such conditions a country will try to replace the import of a product with another product. That is what is called import substitution. And now you understood why the import substitution will be implemented. See, for example, in the past, ornaments and gems were imported on a large scale by the government of India. The reason is the raw material for gems is abundantly available in India. But unfortunately we didn't have that cutting edge technology which convert that raw material into a gem or into an ornament. We didn't have that cutting edge technology. There was a company in South Africa which was very famous for converting precious raw materials into gems and ornaments, and we used to export the raw material, that precious raw material, and we used to import the finished gem or ornament. And by exporting that raw material, we used to just earn very meager, whereas by importing that finished good, we used to pay much. But later on, during the course of India's journey, when some import liberalizations were brought, import of technology played a good role, and that cutting edge technology which facilitated for the conversion of that precious raw material, either gold or diamonds, into a precious gem, either gold or diamond into a precious gem. That cutting edge technology was imported. Now, instead of exporting that raw material to South Africa and importing that finished gem or ornament, with the import of this technology, we are able to use the cutting edge technology ourselves, and we produced very, very precious gems, diamonds and ornaments. So now, will again India import the gems and ornaments after being finished from South Africa or from any other country? No. So now what happens? In the past, we imported the gems and ornaments, but now we are having the technology, so we are creating the gems and ornaments. Then the import of gems and ornaments will be substituted by the import of some other good, that is the import substitution. Then how this import substitution is going to benefit? See here an example. I am paying $1,000. I am paying $1,000 for the import of a product A. For the import of a product A. However, this product was imported for nearly 30 years. Let us assume with the same price. So, for 30 years we are importing this product A with a price of $1,000. That means for this product A, we just spent $30,000. But somehow I achieved the technology for the manufacturing of this good A for nearly something around $12,000. For this $12,000, somehow I achieved the technology for manufacturing this good A. So now I stopped importing the product A since I had the technology, and I myself producing the good A, and so I am spending this $1,000 every year, which was continuously spent by me for 30 years on some other product for which I didn't have the technology, called B. That means this import substitution is facilitating our country to spend the same amount of money on some other good. That means we are saving some money. Of course, for the import of technology, we spend some $12,000. But if we don't get this, again for another 30 years, we will be spending $30,000 by importing the same product A. And already we will be importing the product B also. But now this $12,000 will be recovered in 12 years itself by not importing A. So this $12,000 will be saved in a span of 12 years, and that saved amount will be converted for the import of B. So import substitution is a very good one unless it is used precisely and exactly. So import substitution can be given credit for export growth of India and reduction in the imports of India, and for the expansion of manufacturing sector in India. But there are some flaws in the import substitution policy which was adopted by the government of India, which will be discussed later in this class. Now let us go with the class. Anyway, you understood what is import substitution. Then, first let us concentrate on import restrictions, import substitution, how they were carried out in India, and later we will discuss about the exports. First, import restrictions. An importing license is compulsory and mandatory for importing some products. So, first thing, import license. And there is some specificity about this import license. What is that? For example, import license, in bracket I am defining what is the specificity. For purpose, in the sense, an import license is a license which facilitates a particular person to import a good for a particular purpose, not for another purpose. Even though the good was same, he was not allowed to use that good for some other purpose, only for that particular purpose. And from the particular agency or person always, that means the good has to be imported from a particular person or from a particular agency always. No question of any relaxation. For particular purpose, a particular good from a particular person is the definition of import license. The name license gives some allowance, but its further definitions impose many restrictions. A license, but for the import of a particular good and for the purpose of a particular production from a particular agency through a particular process. So, simply in the name of license only the allowance was existing, but there are many restrictions. So, if I got an importing license, I cannot use the same import license to import a necessary product B, even though that product B is necessary for the production of my company. No relaxation. Next. The products which are to be imported are divided into three categories. Consumer goods, intermediary goods, and capital goods. Consumer goods, intermediary goods, capital goods. Then the third one is, there is a organization called CCI and E. CCI and E. What is the meaning of this CC and IE? Chief Controller of Chief Controller of Imports and Exports, CCI and E, Chief Controller of Imports and Exports. This CCI and E is an autonomous organization by Government of India which inspects over the goods which are to be imported and exported. And in relevant to imports, this CCI and E gave a classification, and that classification applies to all the three types of categories of imports. It applies to consumer goods, it applies to intermediary goods, and it applies to capital goods also. What is the classification given by CCI and E? See, it applies to all the three categories: consumer goods, intermediary goods, and capital goods, and that is non-permissible imports. Non-permissible in the sense totally banned. Non-permissible in the sense totally banned. Next, limited permissible. What is the meaning of this limited permissible? They are allowed as an import into the country, but only when they get a clearance and a mandatory certificate from the Chief Controller of Exports and Imports. Limited category means they are allowed as an import into the country only when they get a clearance and a mandatory certificate from the Chief Controller of Exports and Imports. Next, third one. After non-permissible and after limited, OGL, that is Open General License. OGL, Open General License. This Open General License means they don't need a mandatory certificate, but they need a clearance. They don't need a mandatory certificate, but they need a clearance from the Chief Controller of Exports and Imports. So non-permissible, limited, and OGL, which means Open General License. These are the three different categories which are given by Chief Controller of Imports and Exports. And now, if a good has to be imported into India, it has to go through all this process. The one who is trying to import should have an import license, and I already told you this import license is very specific, very specific. The one who is importing should be the same person, and the purpose for which he is importing should be always the same. No question of any relaxation, and from whom he is importing is also should be mentioned, and through the same process. Next, the product which is to be imported will be coming under any of these three categories: consumer goods or intermediary goods or capital goods. And again, when it is categorized, again it will be classified whether it is non-permissible or it is limited or it is OGL. After all this process and final inspection by the Chief Controller of Exports and Imports, only then the good will be imported to India. So with these type of restrictions, the private people who are trying to expand their manufacturing sector by getting more and more knowledge from the foreign production, either by means of import of technology or by means of import of capital and intermediary goods, they are not stepping forward with these type of huge restrictions. Moreover, from the beginning, Government of India followed a different type of behavior. What is that? if the imported good is a consumer good which is of high necessity, then the import restrictions will be somewhat eased. But if that particular good is either intermediary good or a capital good, then the restrictions will be severely imposed. The restrictions will be severely imposed to block the usage of foreign goods in India. But if they have done that, blocking the usage of foreign goods is good only when usage and the production of such goods in the domestic manufacturing sector was encouraged. But there is no encouragement for the manufacturing sector in domestic market. At the same time, they are not allowing the foreign goods to enter through imports. What happens? There is no availability neither from the foreign market nor from the domestic market, but the demand is rising. As the demand is rising, and since there is no availability of the good, the prices are going up. And so, to meet the demand, the prices are to be raised, eventually leading to inflation. And moreover, actual users in the sense industrialists as well as the manufacturers were called as actual users. Those actual users who are importing some goods as an input or as an intermediary good for their production, during some time in the journey of Indian economy, they were also imposed with huge restrictions. Why? Because to protect the Indian domestic manufacturers who are manufacturing the same good. That is good because encouraging the domestic producers was good, but it should be in a process of selective restrictions. Why I am using this word selective restrictions? See, there is a good A which is also manufactured by the domestic producers, and the same good A is also produced by the foreign producers. Now in the domestic market itself, the price of this good A which was domestically produced is much higher than the imported good produced by a foreign manufacturer. After all the taxes and everything, even though that foreign produced product A is much lower than the domestic produced A, the government of India is not allowing this foreign good A, even though it is available at lower prices, and the government is encouraging only the costliest domestic product and encouraging the domestic producers by protecting them by imposing prohibitory tariffs on these cheaply foreign produced products. So it is leading to unnecessary burden of cost upon the consumers. But protecting the domestic producers is good, but if it is on a selective basis, that would have benefited the economy of India by reducing the costs as well as by reducing the cost burden on the consumers. And if they have imported the technology with which that foreign producer was able to produce that product at a cheaper rate, that would have been benefited much. But neither they are importing the technology nor they are encouraging to import the cheap goods than producing them in the domestic market at a costliest price. All such import restrictions, they have lagged the development of India. Another thing, even though such import restrictions were imposed, some goods which are necessary for government of India and some goods which are directly necessary for the public are to be imported. What are they? Food grains were continuously imported. oil, crude oil was continuously imported, and ornaments and gems in the past, they were also imported. For the purpose of agriculture, fertilizers and some important seeds were also imported, and all these along with some important heavy capital goods for the development of heavy industry mounted the import bills of India on a large scale. At the same time, I already told you there are controlled export policies in India, so the exports were not rising. So we are not earning through exports, but we are paying through imports, even though the import restrictions were imposed. So how it is, the import restrictions blocked the import of technology, import of some goods which definitely speed up the process of economic development of India, and instead of that we are opening the gates for simply non-durable consumer goods. Anyway, in the latter years, gradually when we understood that, we had the confidence that when a country tries to curb us again into its hands, we are able to defend them. And when we understood that globalization has become very prominent in the world market, we have to also adopt the policies of globalization. So then only import substitution as well as import liberalization and encouragement to exports came on its way. This way, many restrictions were imposed on imports, and also on import licenses. Again, these licenses were also categorized. How they were categorized? Import licenses were categorized as for actual users. As I told you, actual users means industrialists. So industrial import license. Then open general license, that is OGL. OGL is open general license, is for mostly consumer goods which are important, which doesn't need any mandatory certificate, but they need some clearance. And there are automatic licenses. Automatic import licenses were also there, and these automatic import licenses, they will be given a free hand, but they need a license as well as sometimes they need a clearance, which may be some important products. In this way, import licenses were also categorized, that is for purpose. And again, there are some goods which are to be only imported through state trading corporations and materials and mineral trading corporations. State trading corporations and materials and minerals trading corporations. So STC as well as MNTC. In this way, import restrictions were imposed in India. Only at the time, that is in 1966, 59 industries were given exemption from these import restrictions. That too, those 59 industries are related for industrial development, like capital goods industries, intermediary goods industries, agricultural industries which import fertilizers, etc. That relaxation was also given during 1966. In the previous video you can find that in 1966 the value of rupee was devalued by 36.5%. As the rupee was devalued, it helped for cheaper imports. During that time only relaxation was given for imports. Next, now let us go to import substitution. See, from 1951 onwards, even though efforts were there for the implementation of import substitution in India, but the efforts showed their effect only after 1955. This import substitution showed a very good effect on Indian economy. That is, between 1951 and 1966, the import substitution accounted for 1/4 of growth of Indian production. Mostly the import substitution was implemented in India with an objective of preserving the foreign resource. That means, just now I told you, the import substitution will facilitate the replacement of the import of a product A by means of a product B. Of course, let us forget about by what reason it was replaced. Whether the technology of manufacturing A was imported or whether the necessity of A was not there, whatever it may be. Anyway, this import substitution was implemented with an objective of preserving the most scarce foreign resource. That means, if we are stopping the import of a product, we are saving the foreign exchange resource which are to be paid for the import of that product. So we are not importing, we are not paying that foreign currency. So we are saving the foreign exchange resource. The other objective is, with import substitution, the manufacturing sector of India can be expanded. The manufacturing sector of India can be expanded. With that view, the import substitution was implemented in India. This import substitution, in the beginning, even though it showed a very small effect, in the latter stages, it showed good effects by showing 1/4 growth of Indian production expansion just because of this import substitution. But there are also some flaws in this import substitution. If this import substitution was implemented on a selective basis and also by considering the efficiency as a important aspect, the import substitution would have given more good results. But whatever be the industry, whatever be the cost of production, import substitution just protected the domestic producers. How? Just like I told you now, even though there is a cheap availability of a product from the foreign country, but to encourage the domestic producers, we are prohibiting the foreign goods and encouraging the domestic producers to produce the good even though it is costlier than the same good which was produced in the foreign. What is happening because of this? The actual objective was extincting. Why? The actual objective of import substitution is to preserve foreign exchange, but we are preserving the foreign exchange at a very high cost of domestic currency. We are preserving the foreign resource at a very high cost of domestic currency. That means, in one way, we are undervaluing the foreign currency. What is the use if we are producing the same good at a very high cost than incurring very high cost on the domestic production of this good? Why can't we use the same domestic currency for getting the same good at a cheaper cost? So, it is not good. Again, giving a complete protection to such domestic manufacturers gave wrong signals in the market. Why? Since by prohibiting the foreign goods, what we are doing, we are encouraging the domestic people and they are producing them at a high cost and they are getting more profit. This profitability of producing the banned goods in the domestic market gave wrong signals in the market, and all the people tried to domestically produce the banned goods. See, why the good was actually banned? To encourage the domestic market, even though it is available at cheaper cost from the foreign market, the good was banned through prohibitory tariffs and domestic producers were encouraged. Now it gave wrong signals. What the people are doing, all the banned goods were domestically produced. That means what is happening? What is happening? Even though it is for a good, a bad is going on here. Banned goods may be unhealthy goods. So such banned goods were also domestically produced. So this gave a wrong signal. And there are some high class people in the society. Usually demand is considered from all the classes of the society. If the demand is on a large scale from the masses will be considered as the biggest market, because the high class people will be very less. So considering the demand among the masses and the middle class, the good will be produced to get profit. But the high class people, by using political pressure, they started creating an artificial demand. With that artificial demand, the import of some goods from the foreign countries was banned, and to meet the artificial demand which was created by the high class society, the same good was manufactured in India for a higher cost. Sometimes, unfortunately, the same good may become a necessary for the middle class and the lower class also. What happens? Since it is an artificial demand creation by the high class society, even though the cost was high, the high class will be able to buy it, but the same cost will be fixed even for the middle and lower class. So because of an artificial demand, the good was sold at a higher price when the necessity also came to the middle and lower classes. What is happening? They are incurring huge costs, and after some time they lose the interest, and these high class society people, they will be having the goods in handy, and the high class society people stop buying, as well as the middle class and lower class people who are not able to buy, they also stop buying. Ultimately, loss of demand for this good, and the person who established this industry on seeing the artificial demand created by the high class society and the political scenario, he will just left with no demand, and such industrialists will be having losses, and again a void in the industrial market. And such corrupted practices and also this profitability of the banned goods is creating a unseen black market in the country. So in that way, import substitution created some negative impact on the Indian economy. But even then, we have to give the credit to this import substitution for this great thing, 1/4 growth of Indian production. And just because of this import substitution only, import of technology was facilitated in India for manufacturing some goods domestically. So in this way, import substitution is a prominent policy of India's trade policies. Now let us go to another one. During 1980s, import liberalization of India. Import liberalization after 1980s, especially from 1977-78. We can say especially from 1977-78. Why? What might have forced the government of India to announce import liberalization? Actually, import liberalization was there in the past also in India, but on a very meager scale, very small scale. That import liberalization was also given, I told you, for a mere 59 industries. which are very necessary products. So to meet the demand of that necessary products, import liberalization was given. But the scenario is different after 1980. Import liberalization was announced on a never seen large scale in India. Why? See, in 1977 and 78, for the first time, Janata government came into existence. By that time, the government of India's financial situation is not good, with very scarcity of foreign exchange reserves. The balance of payments were also not in a good stage. To boost the economy, Government of India appointed some committees. About the committees we will be discussing in the later classes. But let us discuss what that committees said. All the 6 committees, which are very important committees, the 6 committees said that we are having abundant availability of resources. But what India is doing, even though we are having abundant availability of resources, our country is exporting the raw materials for a cheaper cost and we are importing the finished goods at a higher cost. And for the finished goods, raw materials were from our country. Why such a situation is arising here? Because we are not having the technology to manufacture the complete finished good in some important categories. And with the continuous import restrictions, we are not allowing the manufacturers to import the technology and to produce the good domestically. Thus we can have the profit. Even though we are allowing the import of technology for some categories in the past, the profitability is not lying there. The profitability is lying here. Why? Because the import policy of India always tried to meet the demand of the market, but not to encourage the manufacturing sector. But an import policy should be in a way that it has to meet the demand domestically if we are not able to manufacture it. At the same time, if we are having the chances of manufacturing the good domestically, then we have to facilitate the import of technology and we have to facilitate the import of technology in those areas where the profitability lies much, and we have to encourage the import of capital goods as well as intermediate goods where the profitability lies much and where the import of goods will encourage the exports. So a multi-thinking import policy is necessary for India. That is the ultimate advice given by those committees. What is that? Think multiply and then frame a import policy. And what are the multiple thoughts? The multiple thoughts should be: 1. Import of technology should be given complete free hand, and import of technology should be given priority on profitability basis and on encouraging the exports basis. Next, import of goods should be given a priority only when we are having no chances of producing the good domestically. But when we are having the chances of producing the good domestically, either we should encourage the domestic producers, and if they need some goods, some inputs for the import, then we should give them a free hand. And moreover, licenses should be made flexible. As I told you in the past, the licenses are given in a very specific manner, means high inflexibility. That should be avoided. Licenses should be given on a flexible manner, and the priority of issuing licenses should be given to exporters, because exports will give huge income to country. So licenses should be given on the basis of, first priority should be for exporters, second priority should be for domestic expansion of manufacturing sector, third priority should be for the most important consumer goods like pharma, and other medical products or any important consumer goods. So in this way they gave some advices. With that advices, import liberalizations were started after 1980s. Unfortunately, even though the committees were appointed by Janata government didn't have a chance to implement the advices given by those committees, and the latter government, the Congress government, which again elected in the 1980 midterm polls, that carried on with the advices, and import liberalization was announced gradually on a large scale in India. And this import liberalization facilitated for the import of capital goods, import of important intermediary goods, and duty-free imports. Duty-free imports for technological as well as exports purpose. That means if the import of a good is very necessary for the exports, to encourage the exporters and to make the Indian goods in the foreign market more competitive in prices, and to facilitate the import of technology for the expansion of Indian domestic manufacturing sector, duties were not imposed. So, import of capital goods with complete liberalization, import of important intermediary goods with complete liberalization, and duty-free imports for technology and exports, and sometimes licenses were given against export license. That means registered exporters were given import license even though they didn't apply. Why? By getting an import license, they will be having a second thought. I am buying the first class, first hand capital goods in the domestic market at a higher cost. Till now I didn't think of importing them because I have to pay much for imports. Now the government itself has given me an import license at free of cost, and it announces some duty-free imports. Why can't I import some second-hand capital goods or second-hand intermediary goods at a cheaper cost, so that my good will be of a lesser cost, so may attract more and more customers in the foreign market while exporting. So this thought eventually forced the domestic exporters to happily and with much interest to import second-hand capital and intermediary goods. With this, three important aspects of the India's import liberalization in India's trade policy. One way we can say the scenario of government of India has changed, but this is a capital investment, initial capital investment, which may encourage the expansion of the manufacturing sector. But this at the same time should encourage the exports. Otherwise what happens? Imports are increasing with import liberalization. So import bills are increasing, so we are paying much, but exports are not increasing, we are earning less. So what happens? balance of payments gap is going on increasing, which may lead to crisis. If at all, when we are investing much through import liberalization, if we are able to bring out all the financial resources to meet the demand, that would have avoided a worst balance of payments crisis. This is a good thought, but at the same time, there should be some concentration on raising the exports on a rocket speed level. But Government of India failed in improving the exports, so we got a balance of payments crisis in the latter years, that is in 1990-91. Anyway, this import liberalization has paved the way for the expansion of manufacturing sector in India with handy technology from the foreign countries and handy import of goods. And once the import liberalization facilitated for the import of technology and for the import of capital goods as well as intermediary goods, analysis was carried on with that and research on raw materials went on, and this facilitated with the import substitution for in the latter years gradually increasing the expansion of the manufacturing sector domestically as well as reducing the imports. But again, there are some flaws in the import liberalization. That is delay. What is the delay? The process of carrying on the applications given by the importers was a delay, because there are many departments which has to give the permission. Moreover, import licenses were given on a equity basis. That means Government of India used to announce 100 licenses for the year 2014. There are many applicants, say some 1,000. And among the 1,000, what they used to do? All the 1,000 applications were just gone through a scrutiny, and this would take a much time. After the scrutiny, again some around 250 will be selected, and again in the 250 on a equity basis, equal justice to different sectors. So different eligible sectors will be selected and different eligible 100 sectors will be selected, and for this different 100 sectors, these 100 licenses will be given on a equity basis, but not on a preferential or not on a profitability basis. Neither on preferential basis, nor on a profitability basis, and nor on a importance basis, just social justice and equity basis. What happens? Say for example, among these 100, there are some industries which may not be having an interest to use that license in this year, but for future use they have applied for license. Now they got the license, but they are not going to use this license this year. Some other year they may use that license. So one license was wasted. In this way, there are many unused licenses. In the latter years, some committees announced that nearly some business tycoons are having 450 licenses unused. They are claiming the licenses every year and the licenses were not used. So these types of delays affected the slow growth of Indian economy. Then again, it should be somewhat selective, but they didn't go in a selective way, and they have given protection to every industry. Moreover, this import liberalization, it just attracted the domestic manufacturers to claim the licenses and to use this import liberalization to continuously import technology and to carry on with more and more production centers. But they never showed their interest, or they never concentrated on improving the efficiency. What happened? For example, I am there, I just claimed some licenses, and suddenly the government announced import liberalization. So one license can be used for many purposes. So with the licenses I am having, I just claimed many manufacturing production units and imported the technology with the duty-free exemptions given by Government of India. So I got some 200 technological imports with complete permissions. Now I just went through the establishment of all the 200 manufacturing units, and I just carried on with production. What happened? One person, one entity just concentrating on 200 manufacturing units, so the efficiency came down. Wastage of production units and underutilization of resources. 200 manufacturing units merely with a small output due to lack of concentration and lack of efficiency. Import liberalization was good, but it has to be gone through a selective process by streamlining and by scrambling the process of manufacturing sector in India. But we have concentrated on opening the gates for imports, but we never concentrated on streamlining the imports nor on scrambling the process of manufacturing in India through imports. So this showed some bad effects. In this way we can analyze the import policies of India. So in the trade policies we have completed the imports. In the next class we will discuss about the exports and the principles and policies followed by Government of India in exports. With that we will be completing the foreign trade topic completely.